Dennis Fritz. Some people said it's almost like Daniel Ellsberg with the Pentagon Papers. Dennis Fritz is a retired Air Force commander, chief master, sergeant. During his last 10 years of active duty service, he served as the principal senior advisor to 4-star commanders at Pacific Air Forces and Air Force Space Command. Anyway, let me just tell you, because I'm reading his bio, this brother was at the Pentagon, and he saw some stuff. He saw the papers. He saw what they were saying, and he's going to share it with us. Yes, he is. His book is called Deadly Betrayal. Deadly Betrayal.
Okay, let me just pull this up for you. That's the copy of it right there. Deadly Betrayal, the truth about why the United States invaded Iraq.
And a lot of the portions of the book is Deadly Betrayal, the truth about why the United States invaded Iraq. The truth. He was there. He was reading the documents. He said, OMG. These folks is crazy. We knew they were crazy. They're crazy now. They're committing genocide in front of our eyes and lying about it, and we know it's a lie.
Sylvester, I spent some 28 years in the Air Force. I retired as a command chief master sergeant. For those of your audience who have never been associated with the military, I was held one of the highest, the highest enlisted rank, and two of the highest enlisted positions in the Air Force and in DOD. And so as I made my way up the ranks, I had an unusual career. I spent the majority of my time in the Pentagon, even as a young enlisted man, where I was around our foreign policy and Department of Defense policy. And I always just read and studied everything I was associated with. So let's fast forward to 2001, 9/11. I was assigned to Joint Base Andrews at the time, home of Air Force One, and I was responsible for all the enlisted men and women that supported Air Force One. And when New York was attacked, the Twin Towers were attacked, and likewise in New York, the Pentagon, where I had served the majority of my career, was attacked, where I had a brother-in-law, one of my best friends ever. Being a part of the I would say
Hoopla.
the Black community, someone
Okay.
that you probably know, Elijah Cummings, a former congressman out of Baltimore, Maryland, where his son was assigned. I'm sorry, his brother was assigned with me at the Pentagon. So I quickly thought about him, a brother-in-law I had at the Pentagon, and my former boss, General Myers, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But I had to fast turn back and think about what was going on at Joint Base Andrews, as I stated earlier, being home of Air Force One. We had to quickly put our base in lockdown because we didn't know what was going on. Could Air Force One and Andrews Air Force Base be next? Now, with all that said and done, like everyone, when 9/11 hit, we were all upset. In fact, I would say many of us wanted revenge. And so we supported at the time President George W. Bush and his administration, not knowing why, but we supported him in going into Afghanistan. But later on, in December, after the Taliban were, quote, unquote, allegedly defeated, we in the military started seeing operation orders for Iraq. We were going to start mobilizing and sending people to that part of the country. And we started hearing news about attacking Iraq. And those of us in the military didn't understand why. Why are we going to Iraq? What do they have to do with 9/11? And me as a senior enlisted leader, a lot of the young troops and their families were coming to me with that question. And Sylvester, I got to tell you, I had no answer for them. And so not wanting to send troops off to war, my credibility was very high with the troops, always being truthful with them. And it bothered me that I could not tell them why we were going to war. Whether we believed in it or not, we had so-called a reason why we were going in Afghanistan, to take out the Taliban because they supported and was holding and supporting bin Laden. And so we supported going to Afghanistan, whether right or wrong, but we didn't understand Iraq. And so with that feeling of me having not knowing why, I just couldn't bear the heart of sending troops off the war, something I truly didn't believe in. So on the enlisted side of the house, you can't resign as officers can, but I had over 20 something years in so I could retire. And so I requested to retire so I could be an outspoken person about the Iraq war, not knowing the reasons why we were going. But then let's go again. Let's fast forward again. Uh, I call it divine intervention. I end up because of the fact I tried it in what we call the private sector. I lasted 3 months after being in the military for 28 years in the private sector. I just didn't like it. And so some friends of mine saying, listen, Fritz, we know how you feel, but you got to come back to the Pentagon. We need your help. You know, you have the expertise in certain areas. And so I found myself, and let me just mention this, Sylvester. I left the military not knowing, again, why we were going into Iraq, never thinking I'll ever know why, you know. But divine intervention is I found myself back into the Pentagon, working on the staff of the number three guy in the Pentagon, a guy by the name of Doug Fife. I'm going to mention some names to your audience because when we get to my book, I wrote my book, as I stated, for the military men and women. It's a quick read, and I also broke it down so that we could fully understand, foreign policy. Folks have not been associated with foreign policy, in case your audience is likewise. And so I found myself working for the number three guy in the Pentagon. The number one guy that everybody's heard the name is Donald Rumsfeld. Okay, so everybody heard that name. And then the second in command in the Pentagon was a guy named Paul Wolfowitz, and then the third was Doug Fice. He was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. And I found myself working on a team that were declassifying all the pre-planning war documents for Iraq and Afghanistan. And the story was, and I'll let you break it if you just let me get this out, break it anytime you want to have a question and stop. Say, hey, Fritz, let me ask you about this. And so,
I want you to flow, and then I'll ask questions. I'm trying to
okay,
write
all
down so I
right.
don't forget. But yeah, I don't want to stop your flow.
Okay, thank you. And so anyhow, uh, the team was put together because of the fact of the controversy of the Iraq War and the historical significance of the Iraq War. And so we were told a team of three of us were put together so that we could declassify as many of the Iraqi pre-planned war documents as possible for future freedom of information requests from the media, from historians and scholars. But we quickly found that our truly mission was we were declassifying this documents for the guy by the name of Doug Fife, as I mentioned earlier, so he could go out there and write a book telling more lies of why we went to war. And so when I saw him doing that, I said, well, wait a minute. If he can do that, I can do it. And so I started writing my book as we started, declassifying the documents and so forth. And so that's where the initial thought of writing the book. Now, why did I want to do that? Uh, Sylvester, the book is entitled Deadly Betrayal. And the reason I titled it that is because of the fact 4,500 U.S. military men and women lost their lives based on a WMD lie. And I thought that was low down dirty that we sent troops off the war based on a lie. And so that's why I decided to write this book. I wrote it on behalf of the troops. Not only that, I must mention too, after I left the Pentagon in 2008, I challenged one of my former bosses, as I stated earlier, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, General Dick Myers, and another former boss of mine, that listen, when we go to war, we better take care of our troops when they come back. And so I spent from 2008 to 2022 working on the Department of Defense's Wounded Warrior Program, a hospital and a major medical center that your audience has probably heard of, Walter Reed. And I oversaw the non-medical care, the mainly the personnel support of our wounded warriors, as we called them. And as I saw the numbers, overall, there's hundreds of thousands of military men and women that are injured for life, both mentally and physically. And that really drove me to write my book, too, on behalf of them, so that they would know why they went to war. And it was based on a lie. And we can get into, my book and why we went to war. But I can tell you right now, Sylvester, that those in the Pentagon and the George W. Bush administration knew there was no WMD in Iraq.
Let's
That's
go
what
back.
bothered me most.
Let's go back a little before the Bush administration. I think, did you mention that during the Clinton administration there was some edict or something to overthrow Iraq?
Oh, good question, Sylvester. Good question. Yes. This goes all the way back to the 1990s, what we call the first Gulf War, when we invaded Iraq uh, in support of Kuwait. At the time, Saddam had invaded Kuwait, and so we went in to free Kuwait from Saddam. And during that time, there were some in the Pentagon that felt that we should have went in and just removed Saddam at the time. But uh, President Clinton, when they came into office after the first George H.W. Bush administration, that's when the first Iraq War occurred under George H.W. Bush, the father of George W. Bush. And so when Clinton came into office, there were those your audience is going to hear the terms they have not heard it before, neocons. And the neocons, who are the folks that are really pushing our foreign policy today, whether it be in the Middle East or the Ukraine-Russia war. And the neocons were a group of folks that came about during the Reagan administration. That's when, if you look back in the history, Reagan came on and said, Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And that was the wall between Germany, East Germany and West Germany, that separated the East and the West. And so these neocons who wanted us to take over the Middle East, when they saw Reagan's military policy, they were former Democrats that rushed over to the Reagan administration, became Republicans. And during that
What?
time, you have a question for that? Go
You want
ahead.
to name names? A lot of Democrats, just because of that policy, went over to be Republicans.
Well, there are some of those folks. I'll give you some of those names. Like I said, Paul Wolford, for example, was one who was the number two guy, and it's not going to be known names. They were more foreign policy individuals, and so they may not be known names to your audience. But Paul Wolford, uh, Doug Feist, his father at the time, and there were more so folks that believed in what we call America's imperialism, control of the world. And they felt that if the wall came down, that was put us in a position to actually control the world, if you will. Uh, and I just give an example. We can talk about that later too. How we got into the Ukraine Russia war. That was part of us being able to control the world. But let me
Right.
just get back to this point of the neocons. The neocons have different factions. Rumsfeld and he was always traditionally a Republican, but I consider him a neocon or neocon sympathizer since Rumsfeld has since passed now. But uh, there are some that's in the neocons that see the America as uh, the leader of the world. They call it exceptionalism. We're better than anybody, and we should be the ones that are leading the world. Then you have
American
another
exceptionalism.
American exceptionalism. Well said. Then we have another faction that really concentrates mainly on the Middle East, and that is in support of Israel, that particular faction. And at the time in the Pentagon, when George H.W. Bush came in, their main focus was the Middle East and control of the Middle East on behalf of Israel. Now, getting back to your original
They're neocons and
question,
American exceptionalists also, right?
say it again.
The ones who are looking at the Middle East are still American exceptionalists and neocons.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just a different faction
Hmm.
of it. You have the faction that would just really want to tear down Russia. They're the ones supporting the Russia-Ukraine war right now. And then you have a faction, for the Middle East. That's their sole interest, in support and defending Israel. And that's what got us into the Iraq war. Now, with that said, you mentioned about the Clinton administration, where after the first Gulf War, uh, Bill Clinton was pressured by the neocons and said, "Listen, we need to remove Saddam." And they came off a law called the Iraqi Liberation Act, and that's where it first started of what we call a regime policy change in Iraq. And the goal was to go in and remove Saddam. Well, why? You should ask probably Sylvester. Well, the reason being is that Saddam was supporting Hezbollah and Hamas, the names that you hear about now, and and uh, and they felt that we needed to remove Saddam because of the fact without the support of Saddam, the Palestinian people would not have a military arm to support them against Israel. Now, let me share something with you. You know, Israel gets Hezbollah and Hamas, they get bad names. They're terrorists. They're terrorists. They're bad. Well, the American government, along with Israel government, they're good at disinformation. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Let's talk about Hezbollah and Hamas. And I use this with cousins and friends, Sylvester, and I'll use you. Let's say that your dad, your granddad, someone in your family had land out there in California, or if if they grew up in the South and had land that was left to you and your family. In my case, I use my cousins in North Carolina. Our granddad left us plots of land. All of a sudden, somebody's going to come in and say, "Hey, that was our land, and we're going to take it from you." And I asked my cousin, "Are you going to let them take it? There's going to be some to be the Martin Luther King and say, 'Yeah, let's do it peacefully. Let's not let them take our land.' And then there's going to be some to Malcolm X and say, 'Hey, we're going to fight you to the end.'" Well, that's what Hezbollah and Hamas is. You're just not going to come in and continue to take our land. And that's when, for your audience, that's how when you hear about refugees in the Gaza Strip and so forth, they became refugees because of the fact Israeli factions came in and just said, "We're going to take your land and it's ours." And so there are going to be some people to fight back. And that's what they did. Now, with that said, Saddam was supporting them, with the money and equipment. And so they forced President Clinton into creating this law that we're going to change the regime in Iraq. Now,
So this was an official law created.
oh, absolutely. That's the surprising thing. This was an official law. Yeah, regime change policy. And so now that's a good question, Sylvester. So Clinton didn't do that. So when the George W. Bush administration came in, the neocons jumped right in on there. They came from what you call an organization, a think tank, a conservative think tank in Washington called the AEI. And they were all neocons with they were associated with the Middle East faction. And they all became a part of his administration. And you'll see that in the book of the George W. Bush administration. And they were trying to they came in 2001 ready to go to war with Iraq. But guess what? They had no reason why. They had the regime change policy law, but they didn't think the American people and the world would support that. And so they started coming out with, okay, how can we go to war? And they couldn't come up with no reason. Sylvester, unfortunately, 9/11 happened. And that gave them the reason to go to war. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Now, people have been trying to pressure me. I don't get caught up in conspiracy theories. I tell what I know to be factual. As I will tell folks in the interview, I can give you facts, I can give you an assumption, and I can give you an opinion. Now, I'm going to give you a fact. Before I give you the fact, there are many people through previous interviews trying to force me to say that 9/11 was an inside job. There are many people that believe that. I can understand why they believe that. But I don't know that. I never saw anything in the Pentagon that said it was an inside job. It was always geared toward bin Laden. But what I can tell you is a fact. Unfortunately and sadly, there were people in the Pentagon that was glad that it happened. That's a fact because it gave them a reason to create the so-called war on terror to go out and start their big mission of not only taking out Iraq, but taking out, listen to this now, how it comes dear to our heart in the history of what's going on now, not only to take out Iraq, but to take out Syria and then finally Iran. Now, why? Those were the three countries that we couldn't control. We had agreements with Saudi Arabia. Jordan had made a peace deal through bribery. We give Jordan billions of dollars a year to make peace with Israel. Also, Egypt. We give them $1.8 billion a year to make peace with Israel. But the only three countries that we couldn't bribe were Iraq, headed by Saddam, Syria, headed by Assad, and then the Ayatollah in Iran. And so the goal was to go to war with all three of those on behalf of Israel. And that's a fact. Now, how does it tie into what's going on today? Bibi Netanyahu, who is the prime minister of Israel now, he's been the prime minister a couple of times. But during that time to lead up to the war, he was the finance minister. But he had a lot of pull in the government. He was very strong in the government at the time. He was part of what we call the Likud party. And he was the finance minister at the time. He was working with neocons in the United States of America in this mission to take down Assad, Saddam, and the Ayatollah. And how they were going to do that, they were going to take out Iraq first, because remember, as we talked about earlier, we had a regime policy change that President Clinton didn't act on. So they figured that would give us cover to do that. Then we were going to go after Syria. Why? We were going to say Syria had chemical weapons. And then we were going to go after Iran to say, well, guess what? Something we've been hearing for decades. Iran is making a nuclear weapon. We've been hearing this for decades. If they were making a nuclear weapon, it would have been done by now.
So you're saying both of those were fiction?
Fiction, absolutely, to go to war. Now, how did we get to Iraq? After 9/11, they knew the American people were scared to death. And they said that this WMD thing, weapons of mass destruction, they said that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. And with him having those weapons of mass destruction, he could put those weapons of mass destruction, better known as WMD, the hand of terrorists, and they could come over here and we could have another 9/11. That was all lies and fabrication to scare the American people to support the Iraq war based on a lie. That war was based at the start of what's going on now. Let me tell you, when I mentioned about Bibi Netanyahu has always wanted to do what is happening now. He wanted to go in and take over Gaza, displace and move the Palestinian people out, force them to go into Egypt, force them to go into Jordan, where the majority of the Palestinians who became refugees actually went into Jordan. They have the largest, outside of Gaza, Jordan has the largest population of Palestinian people. So that was Bibi's goal, even if he has to go in there and kill a bunch of people as he's doing now. However, the Bush administration didn't want Bibi and Israel to do that. Why? You see the repercussions that are happening now. They couldn't take the pushback from the world of saying you're doing a genocide and displacement, which, oh, by the way, as I talk to lawyers, it is truly a genocide. It's definitely a displacement because they're trying to move. And you think about this for a moment. Look at all the destruction that is happening in Gaza. It's no longer livable. Your audience can go out there and Google Gaza as it is now and what it was. It is no longer livable. You can't help but think the intention was a displacement and genocide to kill as many people as possible. Now, Sylvester, those of us in the military community, and what bothers a lot of us is that there's something called the Geneva Conventions, and it's internationally known. You do not bomb hospitals, you do not bomb schools, and you do not bomb residential areas. And that is exactly what Israel is doing right now. And unfortunately and sadly, the United States of America is complicit in that. Why? Because we're providing the bombs and we're providing the financial support. And sadly, we're providing the diplomatic support in the United Nations in support of Israel, killing of innocent women, children, and even men. Now, think about this right now. All over the news right now is the hunt for a killer of a CEO in the medical insurance world. Now, if that individual was stuck in a schoolhouse with women and children, do you think we would go in there and bomb that schoolhouse? We would use that. So I want your audience to think about that. That's why it's against the law. We will not go in there and bomb that school. We're calling. First of all, we'll try to negotiate, with the individual, whatever, to get him out. And then if not, we're bringing the special police and so forth to try to, maybe get a marksman, to take him out, or we may have to go in. But we'll do everything we could to save the innocent. Well, what's going on in Gaza? There's nothing whatsoever. They see so-called, which none of us believe, they see what's up one terrorist, and they go in there and bomb an entire hospital. There is no working hospital in Gaza right now. I've talked to doctors that have come back from Gaza, American doctors, and one is going back, believe it or not, Sylvester. He's been bombed already, where he was laying in a cot, resting from some surgeries he performed, and was knocked out of his bed from a bomb. An American out of North Carolina. He's going back. Now that's bravery. That is bravery. But that is what Israel is doing to Gaza right now. Something that Bibi Netanyahu has always wanted to do. The first stage of that was us going to war. We figured, hey, we can't do that, but we're going to take out the countries, Israel, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, and we're going to take out their governments, and we're going to replace them, friendlier governments to the United States and Israel, where we want to kill all these innocent women and children, and then we're going to probably displace Palestinians because they won't have no arms support in Hezbollah or Hamas. That's how it ties in together.
Wow. So let me ask you, because they used 9/11 to justify their war in Iraq. Let's look at October 7th. What,
Oh, you're good. You're good, Sylvester. You're good. It ties in, but let me wait for your question.
well, I think that is the question. Because when I first saw this, I said, wait, this is supposed to be the most sophisticated, secure country in the world.
The
And
most secure.
then when it came out, President Biden was saying, I saw evidence of beheaded babies, which then the gray zone found was a complete lie. And so I'm thinking, how much complicity did Israel have in October 7th? And then, of course, we saw evidence that a lot of the Israelis that were killed by the IDF.
Yes.
You comment on that
So
whole thing.
let me share this. It's almost like, you remember I said there are folks that really want to tie me down and said 9/11 was an inside job. Well, I can't say that. I don't know that. But I do know they were glad it happened. There are some that are saying that October 7th was an inside job or they allowed it to happen. Now, I don't know that, but I can tell you what I believe. I feel 99.9% confident they allowed it to happen. You know why? Because what you just stated, it is the most secure country in the world. And you're talking about over an hour or two of just carnage, by the so-called Hamas terrorists. And there was no response by the Israeli forces, the IDF. No response. You're talking about something that maybe be a 30 minutes to an hour away. Think about that. What took so long? What took so long? Now, how do you tie that in together? Bibi Netanyahu is on record of saying that October the 7th is our 9/11. October the 7th is our Pearl Harbor. But guess
Interesting.
what? That's on record. Y'all just can check that. He's on record of saying that. So what does that tell you? That gave him the excuse to do what he is doing now, because the way the George W. Bush wanted to do by attacking the governments that supported Hezbollah and Hamas, it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work, let me go back to that. As I stated earlier, if we would have been successful in Iraq, we were going to Syria next and then Iran. Well, what happened was we got tied down in what they call an insurgency, where the former Iraqi military fought back because we disbanded the Ba'ath Party, as they were called, military. And so they became renegades. And they fought back for their country. So we got tied down. That's how those 4,500 military men and women that died that I talk about, and hundreds of thousands wounded for life, that's how they died based on an Iraqi insurgency that was fighting back. And that's why we didn't go into Syria at the time. So we had to cut that off. And so now, guess what? The Palestinians, Hamas, and Hezbollah were still in place. So October the 7th gave Bibi Netanyahu his excuse to do what he's always wanted to do.
So then you're basically saying that U.S. there was complicity with the U.S. in that lie because
Absolutely. Absolutely. As you said, the president of the United States probably had the most and the best intelligence in the world was coming out saying oh, babies were beheading. And to come to find out that was a lie. But our president helped spread that lie.
True that. So let's look at back during the administration of the Obama and Hillary Clinton was in there. They were in, you mentioned one of those countries they wanted to take out was Syria, and they were in Syria deep. What connection is that part of this whole plan when they were trying to take out Assad back then?
Unfortunately, yes. And that was one of the biggest disappointment I had in President Obama. He got caught up in this controlling of the Middle East. One of his famous words, which your statements he said, which your audience can check out, he said, Assad must go. Now, what gives us the right to say some foreign leader must go? How would we like it? We would go crazy if somebody said President Trump must go, which many of us have said. Uh, President Biden must go, which many Republicans have said. But if anybody else said it, oh, we're upset. But yet we think we can go around. That's that American exceptionalism that we talked about earlier to say, hey, what leaders of governments must go? So Obama made the statement, Assad must go. Oh, the neocons jumped right on that. Well, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? So he did a couple pinprick bombings and everything. But his key mistake that he made was he said that our red line would be if Assad introduced chemical weapons against his people, then we're going to go in. He said that. That's going to be our red line. Well, guess what? The neocons called him out when he said that because mysteriously, all of a sudden, chemical weapons were introduced. Now, we call that a white flag, a false flag, I'm sorry. So, what is a false flag? Somebody else did that, possibly. And there's many of us that feel confident that was a false flag. Guess what? To draw us in to the second stage of taking out Assad, Think about this for a moment. Obama says the use and introduction of chemical weapons in Syria will be the red line where we will go in and attack Assad. But now, Obama came to his senses. He didn't attack Assad, but there were some mad people in the neocon world. He realized, and you'll see in the book, and your audience will see in the book if they purchase it, where I talk about where Obama came to his senses and realized, hey, this is that American exceptionalism again. I got to be careful to not fall into that, of being weak. I said I was going to do, they were calling him weak. He said, I got to keep in mind that I'm not weak and I can't fall to that. And you'll see that in the book where Obama came to his senses. In fact, he put pressure on the Congress. He said, before I go into Iraq, I want this is the one time where some president finally said it, but Obama didn't want to get caught up in starting another war in the Middle East.
In Syria,
he took it in Syria, yeah. But he took it to Congress and said, if you want me to invade Syria, I want you to vote on me going in to war. As people know, Congress are the only people that can declare war. Think about what's been happening since 2001. We've been in all kinds of wars, and Congress has never declared war. It's been presidents taking it upon themselves to do that. But Obama said, hey, I'm not going into another war after I thought the catastrophe in Iraq. I'm going to ask y'all to vote. We never invaded Syria.
So that's all a lie. And then those chemical weapons was just a whole attempt
well,
to
here's the question I have now, Sylvester. Since Assad had chemical weapons, where are they now? Assad is gone. Why didn't if he used chemical weapons before and he knew he was leaving? Why didn't he have his military? Okay, let's get rid of those so-called freedom fighters, as they call themselves, and let's use chemical weapons. He did. If the time to use chemical weapons when he was on his way out the door, knowing that he was going to get asylum in Russia, where are those chemical weapons now? Now that I opened up that door, now probably from your audience, other people are going to start asking that question. Where are all those chemical weapons that Assad had? Why didn't he use them as a last-ditch effort to be able to remain in power? Where are they now?
So let's sort of move forward now to what just happened in Iran. Assad is gone, but the troops or the renegades, whatever you want to call them, from what I understand, are ISIS and Al Qaeda.
Well, some, See, that's the problem right now. Listen, another part of the equation too that was part of their master plan was Libya as well, Gaddafi. And let me just tell you something about Gaddafi and how we demonize people. Let's go back to the past, how they demonize people. Let's go to South Africa. Mandela, a man in his own country, he was put in jail and demonized as a terrorist. Why? Because he was fighting for his country. Gaddafi, he was fighting for his country. Do you realize that he paid for the first apartments of married people? He paid for people to come to school over here in the United States of America. And he was trying, you heard, currently they talk about the BRICS, the currency that the folks are trying to form now through Brazil, China, Russia, India, and one more. And Gaddafi was trying to do that at the time. We didn't like that. Now, why do I bring that up? They were Gaddafi and Libya was part of that. You see, they're gone now. Libya was a vibrant country, rich country. Now it is a disaster, a disaster. They have no government. Well, now Syria. When you ask that question, hey, there's some folks they're Al Qaeda, they're ISIS, they're freedom fighters. We don't know what's going to happen. It could turn into catastrophe just like Libya. But guess what? The master planners got what they wanted. Assad is now gone. So one, they've gotten rid of Saddam, who is now dead. Assad, who said, hey, I'm not going to stay here and be killed. I'm going to Russia where I can have him out and stay alive and maybe do some damage outside, from the outside. So now what is going to happen to Syria? As I told you before, I can give you facts, assumptions, and opinions. I can only give you assumptions and opinions. I don't know, because as you just stated, there's just so many factions right now where they're going to have to come together and hopefully, make it a surviving country, but I'm not optimistic because there's just so many factors involved right now. But the American Israel got what they wanted. They got rid of Assad.
Wow. I got a lot more questions for you. We are talking to Dennis Fritz. He's the author of Deadly Betrayal, The Truth of Why the U.S. Invaded Iraq. So we were discussing, well, let me just ask you personally, you found out all these contradictions, but yet you were a military man. From what you know and what you were doing, when did that contradiction come into place? Or, I mean, are you now, in other words, you learned some stuff while being so pro-American, so pro, we need to do this. But then when did your rise to consciousness or reality take place?
Let me just first say this, Sylvester. When you come into the military, you're indoctrinated. You know, America is the most powerful country. We have to defend America. We have to go to war and fight for our freedoms. All that is disinformation. And I have to be honest with you. Uh, what got me, as I stated earlier, part of that indoctrination, we all felt in the military, hey, we had to go to defend our country. We have been attacked, you know, whether it be New York, whether it be Washington, D.C., whether it be Pennsylvania, the plane that went down in the field in Pennsylvania. We were attacked. We signed up to defend our country. But
So it was what you outlined earlier, basically, when you saw these documents and you asked, why
yeah,
are we going to Iraq?
I'm gonna get to that. Yeah. So I started asking why. Okay, we went into Afghanistan. That's where so-called Bin Laden was. Oh, by the way, but we found him in Pakistan, by the way. But yet we done spent and went in Afghanistan, invading another country. We're supposed to have the best intel in the world, but we invaded another country. He was found in a so-called friendly country. Think about that for a moment, you know. But anyhow, I just jumped the tiger and said, but we found him in Pakistan, but yet we
Good,
invaded
good point. Very good
Afghanistan.
point.
We invaded Afghanistan. Uh, and I lost my thought there. What was your original question?
Well,
I just had to
I was
digress.
asking your transition from
Oh, yeah,
being,
yeah, yeah. So
yo,
we were all on board going into Afghanistan because we didn't know what was happening. But then when we started getting orders, you know, and planning documents to invade Iraq, like everybody was sort of, what does Iraq have to do? And as I stated earlier, I retired from the military because I just didn't believe in that particular mission. And I didn't believe we're going to send troops off the war. It's something I didn't believe in. So how am I going to send troops off the war? You know? And so, as I told you before, when I left to be an outspoken critic of the war, but I found myself back into the Pentagon, divine intervention, as I stated earlier. I ended up in the office where the primary planning of the war took place. And I started reading through all the documents. I tell folks, I call myself, they used to say a cowardly, but people say, no, don't say that. So I call myself a poor man, Daniel Ellsberg. If you never, from the progressive, but if you never heard that, where I'm sure we have, but Daniel Ellsberg was a guy like myself, a contractor in the Pentagon during the Vietnam War, and he had access to top secret documents that stated the Vietnam War was a lie, and we were losing more troops than they were telling us. Well, I found myself in the same predicament. But the reason I call myself a poor man, Daniel Ellsberg, I came out in what I call the official. I didn't see myself going to jail. And so what I did, I wrote my book in the declassified version. And oh, by the way, as you'll see in the book, I sent it to the Pentagon for them to review, and you'll see they redacted quite a bit of it. You'll see that, and your audience will see that. And why redaction is called, they blanketed out certain names and certain people, and you're not supposed to do that. I know what was declassified because I was part of the declassification team, but they still tried to keep me from saying certain things, like identifying dates of meetings and who was attending that meeting. And so, look, hey, let me just tell you this real quickly, though, and then we'll digress back because I want the audience to know and look in the book. But I'll give you three quick reasons why we went to Iraq. It wasn't based on a lie. The first reason, you always got to have a strategy or a doctrine. And their doctrine, remember I said about the neocons, American exceptionalism, we wanted to be able to go, and this came under the guy who I mentioned was number 2 during the George W. Bush administration, but during his dad's administration, George H.W. Bush, the number 2 guy at the Pentagon during the Second Iraq War, as I mentioned earlier, was Paul Wolfowitz. And he was part of the neocons, one of the original neocons. He came up with what we call in the Pentagon the Defense Planning Guidance. And it was part of the New American, Century. I don't know if you ever heard that, but it's called the PNAC. And it was part of this strategy that the American military will have no rivalry. We will be the strongest military. And oh, by the way, we will do anything we want to in the world at any time. Think about that for a moment. That was our doctrine. And so when they came into office under the George W. Bush administration, they had everything in place to be able to do that. And so their first stage was, and it deals with what's going on in Ukraine and Russia right now, but the first phase was to take care of the Middle East. And so we went to war. Number one reason was part of that doctrine that, hey, there's never been peace in the Middle East. We have the strongest military in the world. So part of that doctrine of us doing as we please, we're going to go in and take over the Middle East by taking out those 3 countries I mentioned earlier. Well, they were the only ones that we didn't control. Think about that. They were the only ones. So we're going to take them out. So you always have to have a doctrine. That was number 1. We're going to show how strong we are right now. We're going to take out those countries. Number 2, after we do that, we're going to concentrate on Israel and them dominating the Middle East. That was number 2. And then number 3, this was surprises most. People say, wow, are you serious? President George W. Bush believed in so-called democracy, where if the entire world was democratized, it'll be a more peaceful world. And so, we, the United States of America, we're so peaceful, if you will, but we've been in every major war, for all the decades, but we're so peaceful that, we're going to be strong. You hear the slogan, peace through strength. So we're going to use our military might to make peace. George W. Bush fell in that category. So they were able to convince George W. Bush to go to war because, hey, if we go to war and take out these countries, there's going to be peace in the Middle East and everybody can live happily ever after. But yet the Palestinians will have no place to go. They will remain refugees for eternity because Egypt was not going to take them in because the fact they can barely take care of their people themselves, and Jordan is overcrowded right now. They were not going to take them in. So what would happen to the Palestinian people? But yet we were so-called have peace in the Middle East. So those are the 3 reasons that we went to war, not based on WMD. WMD gave them an excuse because we had a scared American public at the time after 9/11, and people were scared. Oh, Lord, if Saddam gave terrorists weapons of mass destruction and they come over here and use those weapons of mass destruction, we could all be killed again like 9/11.
Ooh, great information. I want to talk about a couple of things real quick as our time is just flying by.
It is, my goodness.
APAC. I want to talk about
Oh,
APAC, and I want to talk about the Russian Ukrainian war. Which one would you like to start with?
let's talk about APAC. It ties into the Middle East. A decade or so ago, Sylvester, I couldn't talk about APAC because I would be branded as anti-Semitic, if I gave my views of APAC. Well, it's not anti-Semitic, it's traumatic because now everybody knows about APAC and APAC tells on themselves. Now, if you go out to APAC website, they will tell you their only sole mission is to make sure that America support Israel. That's their only sole mission. APAC was a part of us going into Iraq. APAC is a part of us going to trying to get rid of Assad. And absolutely, APAC is a part of us trying to go in and take out Iran. Now, all you have to do is go to their site, and you will see that APAC should be what we call a registered agent. APAC is representing another country. If another country or somebody like a member of Congress was representing uh, another country, we would be ready to put those members of Congress in jail. APAC funds, and I'm going to say it up and straight, and I can stand by it. This is traumatic. Our Congress is bought and paid for by APAC. All you have to do, like I said, I can give you facts. I can't. I'm trying to think of her name right now, but I can remember Congressman Bowman out of New York. They took him out, and they spent more money. That was more money ever spent in a race. And our other, I'm
Cori
trying to
Bush.
think of her name,
Cori
Cori
Bush.
Bush, took her out, and they bragged about it. Look what we did. That is against the law. That is against the law, but nobody's being charged for it because of the fact APAC, on behalf of another country, spent millions of dollars to take those members of Congress out. Now, let me just tell you this though. I'm not mad at APAC as much as as mad as our members of Congress. Do you want to be a member of Congress and stay in power so badly that you are scared to speak against right and humaneness? There's only been a few Congress members to come out and say it is wrong to be killing innocent women and children. I have colleagues that have been on the Hill to challenge. I mean, this is a progressive network. I'm sure a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, Medea Benjamin, she's part of what we call Code Pink. She is on the Hill all the time challenging Congress. Can you say it's a genocide? Can you say it's wrong? Not one of them. So here's what I'm going to leave with your audience too. If our members of Congress think so little and value so little innocent women and children and men, but I'm going to say women and children because I want to talk about the children for a moment. If they think so little that they want to stay in Congress so badly because they don't want a chance of being a Bowman and a Cori Bush because I may get voted out of office because OPEC may spend a lot of money against my campaign. If they would do that to stay in office against innocent women and children, how do you think they value you and me? I want your audience to think about that. Innocent women. Let me tell you about those innocent women and children, which our Congress knows about. As I told you, from 2008, when I left the Pentagon in 2022, because I was so mad of what has happened to our military men and women. What got me on this crusade is the 4,500 men and women that were killed, the hundreds of thousands that were wounded for life, both mentally and physically. And we don't even talk about the millions of Iraqis that was killed and displaced. But what got me on this crusade, what we've done to the military men and women. But I will say this, though, and I'll say it again. They want to stay in power that bad. That bad. So how do you think they value us? They will not speak out against the innocent women, killing of innocent women and children. That is our Congress because they're scared of APAC.
Interesting. So as we wrap up, you were talking about these two factions. One wanted to
Yes.
control the Middle East, the other one's over in Europe. Uh, Give us your thoughts on this Ukraine, or is it the U.S. Russian war rather than Ukraine Russian war or proxy
Let me
war?
just,
How
yeah.
would you
Oh,
define it?
wow. Well said again. I want you to think about this for a moment. You know how we talked about earlier, how, whether how you brand people, terrorists or whatever, or you try to discredit people. The organization that I run, the Eisenhower Media Network, I'm the director of the Eisenhower Media Network. We're former national security so-called experts, but we just have a lot of experience in national security. So, all right, they call us experts, but okay, but we have a lot of experience. We came together because after being indoctrinated, America is so this and that, and we're a power, we got to save our country and the world and all that. We decompressed after you look back on it. My decompression period, as I mentioned earlier, when I saw the real reason why we went into Iraq war based on that special project I was on. Many of us have come through, different how we decompress and realize, hey, we've been used and abused all these years. Russia, Ukraine, back in May of 2003, and your audience can Google this, the Eisenhower Media Network put out a New York Times paid ad. That's in May of 2003. I think we entitled the U.S. should be a force for peace. And we broke it down. Russia, there's no longer a Soviet Union or a Warsaw Pact. That was disbanded. Remember I said it earlier? President, now I lost my mind here, President Reagan, saying, Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Okay, he did it. Now, part of the agreement was, hey, if you let us unify East and West Germany, that will be the cutoff. We'll combine the two Germans together and we will not move one step further, east. We'll have the West, you have the East, we have Germany and all that good stuff. The Warsaw Pact broke up. NATO was designed to be a counter to the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. So that broke up. So why do we still have a NATO? That is one thing I would have to agree with Trump on, to be honest with you. Why do we still have a NATO? It was to counter each other. There's no longer. Now, let me just tell you this. Russia even decided, hey, can we be a part of NATO? The U.S. said no. This is documented. Why? Because we want to be the only world superpower and we control NATO, so we don't want you to be a part of NATO. Well, wait a minute. If there's still a NATO, no Warsaw Pact, no Soviet Union, why do you still have NATO? And guess what we started doing? We started expanding NATO. And Russia started telling us, hey, if you keep expanding it towards us, that's going to cause some serious concern because that's affecting and impacting our national security. So the cutoff point was Ukraine was a buffer zone. If you try to make Ukraine part of NATO, you're going to regret that. Now, back in 2014, the president at the time of NATO, of Ukraine, he wanted neutrality. He said, hey, yeah, I don't want to be part of NATO. I wanted a buffer. Once again, United States of America and Senator John McCain, passed on now, but he went over and helped overthrow that government. And a lady by the name of Victoria Nuland, a Democratic neocon that was in the administration at the time, they overthrew that government. And that's how Zelensky came into power and said, we're going to go into NATO. Russia said that was their red line, that if you do that. Why they do that? Because of the fact, as part of NATO, you can put nuclear weapons on a NATO country. And guess what? You got nuclear weapons right next door. That decreases the response time that Russia would have to respond to any nuclear weapon. Now, what is the purpose of the Ukraine-Russia war? And why the U.S. supporting it? You remember that exceptionalism? We're the only superpower, world power. We want to weaken Russia. We want to control their resources. Russia and Ukraine have more grain than any other country. They export more grain than any other countries, especially to Africa. Also, Russia have a lot of oil reserves. And so if they came into, our so-called democratized world, our U.S., we don't ever use this, our U.S. oligarchs would try to take over their oil, their grain. And once again, the U.S. is in power. I'm going to give you another example. When the Cold War ended, all you heard was throwing and poking Russia in the eye. We're the only superpower. We won the Cold War. We are so arrogant. We beat them down and won the Cold War. You get a person who's a nationalist like Putin come in and say, okay, I love my country the way you love your country. So since you think you're the doggone superpower of the world, we're going to show you different. Remember this, United States of America, we have more nuclear weapons than you. So our goal is to so-called weaken Russia through Ukraine. And oh, by the way, as I said to previous audience, here's how we are in America. There's no way, you go back and look, I'm on record for over a year stating that there's no way Ukraine can win this war. There's no way, whether it be by attrition. They don't have enough people compared to Russia. They don't have the weaponry compared to Russia. We keep pouring all that money in, and guess what we're doing? We're killing more Ukrainians and destroying their infrastructure on behalf of the proxy war you talked about, on behalf of the United States of America. It's so bad. We in the United States of America have asked. They have this certain rule in Ukraine. I think they don't recruit or draft anybody below 25. Now, because they're running out of people to fight in this war, we in the United States of America say, hey, you got to start drafting 18-year-old to 25-year-old so you can get more of them killed. And let me throw this at you. The modern technology that Russia have. You see how Israel have destroyed Gaza? When you look at it now and see nothing there, Russia could do that at any time to Ukraine. They don't want to do that. They can do it at any time to Ukraine. So we're using the Ukrainian people on behalf of the United States to so-called weaken Russia. And let me give you another example. It just happened a couple of days when you mentioned about Syria. Well, now we got Israel and the United States government running around in the last couple of days, running their mouths talking about the reason Assad had to go because we weakened Russia, because they're tied up in Ukraine. We weakened Iran because of the fact we took one of their proxy, Hezbollah. Look at us now. We got rid of Assad. The reason we were able to do that because we weakened our Russia, who was in Syria, as you know, Assad's one of Assad's biggest supporters, and they couldn't respond because we, the United States of America, got them tied up, killing Ukrainians on our behalf, destroying Ukrainians' infrastructure on our behalf. That's the United States of America. And listen, by the way, the reason I can say this, I spent 28 years in the United States Air Force, so-called serving my country. And I'm going to tell you, I don't want you to say it, but I want your audience to understand. That's what I've been telling. And a lot of them say this. We're tired of people saying, oh, thank you for your service. What service? Of being used and abused by our government, the so-called defending America. We got used. So you don't need to thank us for our service anymore. We got used. So maybe you should say, hey, we're sorry that our government abused and used you. And now,
Ooh.
another thing I want to ask Sylvester, too, when I say this. Let me just say this now. I love the United States of America. I spent many a time overseas. I couldn't wait to get back home to my United States of America. But that doesn't stop me because I know we're wrong and being a humane person and talk badly about my country when I know it's doing wrong. But I love my country. You hear what I'm saying? I don't want to go nowhere else. Somebody say, oh, if you don't like it, leave. Well, I'll stay here and fight for right here. You ain't going to run me away. I spent 28 years of you thanking me for my service. And so I'm going to be able to criticize what I think is wrong.
Ooh-wee. That's
Now,
Dennis.
I'm sorry, my wife said I get angry, but I deserve to get angry sometimes, you know.
Well, that's real. You being real. We're talking to Dennis Fritz. I know you said you need to go, so I want to respect your time. And
Well, if you
maybe,
got one other question, I've already started getting that call from the other event, but if you got a couple other questions, we can go like a few more minutes because they didn't call me back yet. So
one thing I want to follow the money. People say war is money.
it is.
People
Now,
say war
see,
is money. So what is follow the money? I mean, we know you want this regimes change. It's like an updated Monroe Doctrine in Europe and the Middle East. But where's the money? Because it seems like money's at the top of everything.
remember I said I can give you facts, opinions, and assumptions. When I give you facts, I tell you and your audience, you can go look it up here. Here's an example of the money. As part of the Eisenhower Media Network, we came together because war is money. War is profit. And I'm going to give you an example for Ukraine. We keep pouring all these billions of dollars in Ukraine for them to be killed and their infrastructure destroyed. All you got to listen to, go back and Google Senator McConnell. You can go back and Google the words of Lindsey Graham, who's the worst crook in the world of South Carolina. Senator McConnell is on record of saying hey, the American people upset all the money we're spending in giving to Ukraine. But wait a minute. That money comes back to the United States of America. Well, where does it go, Senator McConnell? It goes to our military arms base. And what is that, Senator McConnell? Military industrial complex, as some of you have heard before. If we continue to use our weapons in war and then giving it to Ukraine and giving it to Israel to kill innocent women and children, because there's no military that the Israel IDF are fighting. They're killing women and children and a few so-called terrorists. But guess what? That equipment has to be replaced. The so-called military industrial complex, why do they love war? It's a business for them. We have to replace and refurnish our equipment, the equipment that we're giving to Ukraine, and the equipment that we're giving to Israel's IDF. That equipment has to be replaced. And guess what? We, you, Sylvester, me, your audience, we're paying for that with our tax. To kill innocent women and children, the military industrial complex are making billions. Now, let me just say this. When they say it comes back, well, there's jobs for our people. They're getting pennies to the dollars to what the CEOs and the executives are getting in the Raytheons of the world, the McDonnell Douglases of the world. They're getting pennies to the dollar. Their coffers are being filled. The military industrial complex. Money, money, money. War is profit.
Well, I guess a lot of those folks, like Dick Cheney, he was invested in Halliburton, wasn't he?
Halliburton, and let me just say that's in my book too. I talk about that a little bit. Halliburton, they got what's called some logistical no bid contract, meaning that Halliburton, even though he said he cut himself off from Halliburton, oh yeah, right away. I guarantee you those trust funds, there was money that was going into some trust fund somewhere. Halliburton got no bid contracts, meaning that nobody else could get that contract because so-called Halliburton had the only expertise to fulfill that work. So they got no bid contracts in Iraq. Which, oh, by the way, before he became the SecDef, I think he was the CEO of Halliburton.
Exactly. So all this ties together because I know when Trump became president in Trump 101, he said, "Oh, I'm not going to divest my business, but I'll turn them over to my children."
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. I mean, listen, at least there's one thing about Trump. He lies in our face, but we know exactly what he's doing too. You know, some of the things, whether we like it or not, he says he's going to do it. He doesn't. He lies in our face, but he don't care because he still does it. You know, I mean, I'm going to the best, but yet I'm giving it to my kid who, guess what, who answers to him.
Oh my God. So I want to wrap up. Maybe we could have you back at another time when the audience can call and ask you questions. But
I would love that. Yeah.
okay, we're on Sundays at 11. But in the meantime, if you want to answer this now, we could wait till that time. What's going on in Africa is a mess. You got the Sahel states that kicked out France and they kicked out United States bases there. I'm sure the U.S. is over there trying to overthrow them. I think you have Senegal with a progressive person. What, as a former in
Yeah, I
Niger,
want to come to Niger.
Mali, and Burkina Faso, yes.
Yeah.
And
Look, let's do this. Because you're a whole bunch of can of worms there. Let's save that one for last. I got a lot to say about that. That's a good thing. We're going to try to overthrow it. Let me just tell you this. Let me just say this part about it. If I get excited about that, I'm going to tell you, Sylvester, I was doing a whole study on that, and I was going to hire somebody at the Eisenhower meeting because to do a study on it because of the fact, I want your audience to think about this. Africa, the people, allegedly, they're supposed to be the poorest people in the world. But then you got to ask your question of this. How is that? The continent of Africa have more resources and minerals than any other continent on this earth. More. Our cell phones wouldn't operate without Africa. France was kicked out because of the fight. They had so-called mounting rights, but they were paying the Africans zero. I mean, I'm just exaggerating, but let's just say zero, while they were getting $10 for everything. They were getting zero. And so let's talk about that because there's a lot. That was one.
We'll talk about that
all
later.
those resources and be so poor.
We'll talk about that later. We've been talking to Dennis Fritz author of the book Deadly Betrayal: The Truth of Why the U.S. Invaded Iraq. So we heard you. We heard him say he will be back on, hopefully one live Sunday, so then the audience could ask you questions. But man, I thank you so much for your time and your experience and your information.
Well, listen, Sylvester, I apologize to you and your audience if I get more, compassionate and excited about this than I should. But man, we have to continue to speak out, and I hope. And my goal is to educate the public because there were certain things when you mentioned like the neocons. Until my book came out, many people, hey, I didn't know anything about the neocons. APAC, which has been out there, for a long time, people didn't concentrate on APAC. So my goal is to educate the American public so that they know what's going on, and hopefully they'll use critical thinking so that we, the people, can change this. I got to tell you, as I said, we can't rely on our Congress. They're bought and paid for. So we got to challenge them with numbers to say, hey, listen, we know what's going on now, and we're going to vote you out. You're going to need more than APAC to stay in the office because all
Thank
that
you.
money that we're giving to all these countries to be going to our people here in the United States of America. There should be no homeless veteran, and there definitely should be no other homeless people. You live right there in LA. We should have buildings made for the homeless to be able to go in. We talk about we're the richest country in the world, but yet we have homeless people, but homeless veterans, which I concentrate most on.